name, date of birth, city, and state in which you live.
My name is Mario J. for Joseph D'Angelo, and I was born and raised in Torrington, Connecticut, and my birth date is February 27, 1931.
Okay. In which war did you serve?
I served in the Korean War.
And what was your branch of service?
I was in the United States Air Force.
Okay. And your highest rank?
When I was discharged, I was a staff sergeant.
Okay. And in what general locations did you serve?
I did my basic training at Sampson Air Force Base in Geneva, New York. And then I served a tour in Korea. And then when I returned from Korea, I spent the balance of my service time in Topeka, Kansas at Forbes Air Force Base, the Strategical Air Command.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I chose to enlist.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Torrington.
Do you recall the date?
July 1951 was when I enlisted.
Okay. And why did you join?
Well, I joined because I didn't care for the Army, and I was always interested in flying, and I thought I might be able to join the Air Force and get into a flight program, and as it was, they accepted me for that. And so I eagerly signed up.
Why did you choose the service branch?
The Air Force?
The Air Force.
Well, like I say, I was always interested in flying. I grew up during World War II, and I was born in 31, and the war started in 41 or 42. I was a young man, and I was just taken with all the aircraft, and I knew their names, and I knew whether they flew off aircraft carriers or land-based, and I used to build model airplanes, and I just liked the whole thing. And as a young boy, I used to make parachutes and jump off garage roofs. Destined to fly.
Destined to fly. I like the way you put it. Tell me about your first days in the service.
First days were basic training. I found it to be enjoyable. I didn't find it to be difficult. I was a skinny little kid when I started basic, and when I got out, I gained some weight. I looked better for it, developed some muscles, and I enjoyed it.
Okay. What are some of your boot camp training experiences?
I couldn't run, and then when we went on these long hikes and runs, I never made it to the end. I just couldn't do it. But beyond that, I did well with everything else.
Okay. Did you remember your instructors?
Well, I don't remember them specifically by name, but I always enjoyed the instructors I had. We became a family, and the barracks. I forgot how many people lived in the barracks with the one instructor, but we'd always have a few boobs, and they would get the latrine duty, and if you mind your P's and Q's, you did well. Somebody had to be picked on. Unfortunately, it wasn't me.
Oh, okay.
But it was a good experience. Made a lot of friends, a lot of camaraderie.
And you got through it.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It was a good thing.
After boot camp, where did you go?
Well, I stayed at the same base because I was destined to go to Lowry Air Force Base for flight training. So rather than train me for a specific job, they asked what I did before I joined, and I said I was a photographer, and I kind of was. And they made me a base photographer at Sampson. And I did that for 4 months, and I was having a wonderful time. Liked it.
Good. What were your first impressions when you arrived there?
At the air base?
Yes.
They're always exciting. People marching around and singing, and I don't know what to say. It was so long ago. I just was never unhappy with the entire experience. Oh, I guess I didn't like some of the preliminaries, the physical examinations, and the hoops you had to jump through before you finally got a clothing allowance and settled down in your barracks. You just didn't know 1 minute to the next, and they marched you around like crazy, stuck you with needles and gave you shots.
So that was probably the worst part of it.
Yeah, but it wasn't a bad thing. And you're not alone. You're part of a big group. It's you just go with the flow.
Okay. What was your assignment there
In after basic,
after basic?
like I said, I was a base photographer,
Okay.
and I worked in a Lieutenant Alexander was the officer in charge of the photo lab, and I went about the base taking photographs whenever told to about various things, from USO shows to pe- people of significance retiring, uh, whatever I was told to do, and then we processed them. And there were some WAFs in the photo lab as well, and I was just enjoying myself.
Good. So you didn't have to go to any classes or?
I didn't do any of that. Like I say, that was set aside because it was assumed I'd go to Lowry.
Okay.
But they didn't call me up soon enough, and I got orders to go to Korea.
Okay. So from there, you went to Korea?
Yes.
And what did you do in Korea?
I was assigned to because I was a photographer, I guess, I was assigned to a tactical reconnaissance squadron, or wing, in Kimpo Air Force Base.
Okay. And what was your job there?
Well, the job of the recon wing was to gather intelligence through aerial photographs to assist in the war. Just to talk about it a minute, when the Korean War started, they didn't even call it a war initially. They called it a police action because it made it easier for the population to digest, because we had just finished the war and President Truman didn't like to insinuate we were going to engage in another war. So it was taken rather half-heartedly by the population. And the GIs that initially went to Korea, they had old equipment. They had equipment left over in World War II. They weren't really equipped for the cold terrain. And there were some brutal battles that were fought in October, I think, of 51. I could be wrong on the date. It's not that important, I guess. But they made a surge to the Yalu River, very, very poor shape to do it, and got beat back. And I believe if I recall right, they evacuated through Incheon, and then the war started in earnest. And that's when I got there. I got there in January of 52 or December of 51. The air base I was on had exchanged hands a number of times, I think 4. When the war started, we had no intelligence gathering whatsoever, and they had to do something, and the 67th was activated, and it had various elements in it. Some did the reconnaissance at night photographs, some did it during the day, and their missions are all different. Some photographed for targets, some photographed at night for troop movements when they used to move a lot, and some photographed to find the most suitable flights for our aircraft to take where to be least vulnerable to ground fire. So that kind of thing was done.
Did you ever go on any of those flights?
I never, no, the photographs were not taken by individuals on board the aircraft. They were actually just a pilot, and the pilot flew an aircraft which had a number of cameras on it. They photographed laterally from the front and back, and depending on the speed of the aircraft and the height, they would set an involumeter, which would pace the photographs so that they would overlap, and then the overlapping allowed the interpreters, when they looked at the photographs, to see them in 3D, and they could find things like false bomb craters and the depth of holes that weapons were cannon were buried in, anti-aircraft ordnance, and they could kind of estimate by measuring the length of the barrel, I guess, and the depth of the hole, what kind of ordnance there was, and they would tell their pilots, "Don't fly that way, but take a different route." And the Koreans, I was told, used to move their ordnance periodically to try to confuse the paths pilots took and try to entice them to get within range. And back then, I don't believe we had the ordnance they do today, where they have missiles that seek aircraft through the heat they emit and what have you. It was strictly cannon fire. So, and we found troop movements and where the activity was and where they housed things, and it was very interesting.
Did you only develop the pictures, or did you also help to analyze them?
Well, no, I didn't do the photo interpretation. That was done by a specialized group. We would process the photographs, screen them, and if we saw something of significance, we would make note and blow the picture up. But more often than not, we would just simply process it, run the prints. They'd go to the photo interpreters. If they saw a likely target, they would send it back, and we might enlarge it so that they could see it better. And then when they did determine they had a target, then it would go to another area where the target would be analyzed as to what it was, and they'd use reference books quite often to see if it were a building, how it was built, whether it was concrete, brick, wood, determine what ordnance it would need to demolish it. They would put all that together, and then they would select a command that could in Korea that could best deal with it and assign it. Then the recon outfit that I was in would accompany the bombers to the site, and they'd take strike photos, and then they would take after strike photos.
They would analyze them again. So, what would a typical day be like for you in the service?
Well, as I explained, I started to explain how they typically dealt with a assignment where we took pre-strike photos, found the target, and then we took strike photos when they attack it, after strike photos to see if the damage was adequate, and if not, they would again bomb it the second time, and then they would mark the area unserviceable or whatever.
Now, would the pilots bring you the photography immediately?
Oh yeah. The way that worked was when the pilot arrived on the airbase, as soon as the aircraft landed, a crew would remove the cameras and bring them to the photo lab where they would be immediately processed. And this was all chemical photography back in '51, and it was done quick. We didn't dilly-dally with it. The processing was minutes. It's because it had to be looked at as soon as possible. So it was a process that went on 24 hours a day. It never ended.
So you would basically get to sleep unless a plane came in after doing a night run.
Well, no, we slept. The wars are on 24 hours a day, and we didn't have to stay 24 hours a day. We worked shifts, but it's just that you never had a day off, but you'd have time off. I would probably work 8 hours, and I'd have a break, and then I would go back and work 8 hours, and I'd have a break, and someone else would be working when I left. It was around the clock, but there was adequate personnel. That was when the draft was on, and there was more than adequate personnel. Not like today, when you serve 2-3 terms. We just went once. Can't imagine going back.
I can't either. Did you see any combat?
No, I didn't personally see any combat.
Okay. So were there any casualties in your unit?
Well, the pilots, yes, there was casualties. And occasionally there was stupid things that happened, but not combat. There'd be some wacko come on the base and cause a problem, and you had to be alert. In certain times we were alerted to be careful, so we carried our weapons everywhere.
Okay. All right, you were a prisoner of war. Did you receive any medals or citations?
I received just the medals that everyone received when they served in that theater. I didn't get any special medals. I made note of them on my form there. I've forgotten what their names are already, but everyone that served in that capacity that I did would get the medals that went along with that particular service.
Okay.
Korean War Medal was one. United Nations Medal was another. I got the Good Conduct Medal, but
That's always good.
yeah, that's a good thing.
Did you sustain any injuries when you were there? Serving?
No.
No. Okay. I think before oh, okay, yeah, we'll go on to the next section. How did you stay in touch with your family?
Just letters. My mother died after I was there 2 weeks, and the Red Cross was kind enough to arrange for me to go to Tokyo, which I did, and then the Red Cross put me in a booth and I called home. And that was amazing. I called home and caught everybody in the house just following the church service. So I spoke to everybody in my family. But other than that, it was all letter writing.
So letter writing. How was the food? How was the food there?
Well, I wasn't too fussy. 19 years old, I ate anything almost. The food was okay. Some of it was, we drank powdered milk and ate powdered eggs.
Oh.
And occasionally, and we ate a lot of spam.
Spam?
Big staple. We ate, once in a while, we'd get fresh eggs and they'd allow you to eat all you wanted. My cholesterol must have been 800 after I'd eat eggs after eggs. The food was okay. It was an extension of K rations. I never ate K rations, but very rarely the kind you get in a little container. But we had cooks that would take an extension of the K ration and they would cook for all of us. And it was, as I remember, I didn't have any problems with that, except I never drank the powdered milk.
Yeah.
Drank a lot of coffee.
Did you have enough supplies for what you needed?
You mean that did the outfit have enough supplies?
Yes.
Oh, I think so.
Okay.
By the time I got there, yes. I think initially when that war started, they were in dire need for a lot of stuff.
Okay. What about, did you feel any pressure or stress in your job?
I don't remember feeling stressed.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think I just did what I had to do like everybody did.
Was there anything special you did for good luck?
For good luck?
Yeah, did you have a good luck charm or anything that you brought with you? No?
No, I don't think so. If I did, I forgot.
How did people entertain themselves? How did you?
Drank beer. We had a club, if you want to call it that. Every air base, every military base has officers' clubs and enlisted man's clubs, and even in Korea they had a Quonset hut with a bar, and we drank. I guess we could get beer there, and guys would bring back hard liquor from Japan.
Okay.
Did a lot of drinking. I didn't drink much, but I was never a drinker. But if you wanted it, it was there.
It was there. Were there any entertainments on your base?
Oh yes, Betty Hutton came. Debbie Reynolds came. She came in the lab, and it was colder than a wool digger's ankles when she was there. And she had red underwear on. She pulled up her skirt or whatever and showed us her red underwear. And then we had a lot of USO groups that came that weren't big name groups, but they were very nice. I think Marilyn Monroe did get there, but I never got to see her.
Oh.
There was a lot of them. I never saw Bob Hope. I'm not sure he came to our base while I was there. And we had movies, 16 millimeter movies, and they were projected on the screen, and we sat on all kinds of boxes and whatever. And I still recall the movie High Noon was shown there, and I was really taken with it, and I knew there was something different. And come to find out, I think it was the first use of the zoom lens.
Oh.
And it was used very effectively when he was walking down the boardwalk and no one would help him with his dilemma, and the camera zoomed way out. And I remembered that, and I thought, how the heck did they do that, being in that photography field at the time? Yeah, and it was black and white.
Yep. Just like the TV back then.
Oh yeah.
Did you go on leave anywhere?
I went to Japan once a month on a rest and relaxation. It was called. It was for 3 days. We all tried to extend it if we could, but sometimes we did. Bad weather, you couldn't fly back. You'd say, "Wee!"
So do I. And what did you do when you went on your R&R?
In Japan,
Yes.
well, I did a lot of things. I shopped. I bought some lovely things I still have, like some Noritake china and some glassware. I bought some figurines, which I still have. They're in this room, actually. Uh, I went to the U.S. I went to the not the U. They had a. I guess it was a club. I guess it was a non-commissioners club, and they had entertainment and marvelous food, and it was really very luxurious. We did that. And I met nice guys, and hobnobbed around. Went to a couple of shows. I don't know what the hell was going on. I remember I sat in one. I had no idea what it was, but it was interesting. They didn't speak English, but you get a haircut, get a nice haircut for 50 cents. And I used to eat some marvelous food for like $2. It was a very inexpensive place to be back then. And you couldn't tip the waitresses.
No.
Crazy. I visited the Imperial Palace grounds, and there was a lot to do and see. It was an interesting country. The people were marvelous.
They were.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I stayed in some magnificent hotels. I'd get in a taxi cab and make them understand I wanted to go to a nice hotel. And it was like $10.
Wow.
They were gorgeous. But it was cheap. Things were cheap.
Were there any particular cities you tended to go to in Japan?
I went to Tokyo, and I went to Yokohama, but that's where you embark. Tokyo, Nagoya. There was a couple of others. The names elude me at the moment. Nagoya was where the religious shrines were, I think. Most of my time was in Tokyo.
Do you recall any particular humorous or unusual events?
Oh, we had a lot of those. We had an alcoholic in my tent. He started out as staff sergeant and wound up a PFC before he got out. It was very sad to see, but he was a genuine alcoholic. And then we had everybody was interesting.
Everybody's they have their own stories, right?
Yeah, I was never in combat, but the guy next door in the tent cleaning his carbine fired it, and it created a pandemonium.
Oh,
They carted him off somewhere. That was my closest combat experience.
yeah. Close as it got.
Yeah.
Were there any pranks that you or others would pull?
Pranks?
Yeah.
Oh, they were all the time.
All the time. What did you think of the officers and your fellow servicemen?
The officers I dealt with were all very nice. When you're in a situation like that, the officers and the enlisted men's relationship, I think, is different than it is when you're in the States, because you're in a war situation, and I don't know. I just think it's a nice relationship. I couldn't say a bad thing about any of them.
Okay. Did you keep a journal at all?
No, I didn't. I didn't have the smarts to do that. I should have.
I think your photographs, though.
Well, I took a lot of photographs. Unfortunately, a lot of them are still in the proof stage. Chemical photography is no longer an item, and I do have equipment. I should sit down one day and print them up. But
Yeah, or maybe go to a photography store or something.
yeah, they could probably run them off computers now and print them.
Okay, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about going into Seoul and your experience with the Koreans that you showed me the pictures.
Well, I enjoyed Korea, actually. I didn't realize how much I did until I got out coming home. in my spare time, I used to wander through the rice paddies and visit the villages and chat with the people that lived in them when I could. I say chat. I don't mean chat in the literal sense, but somehow you manage to communicate in spite of the fact your vocabulary is probably 25 words. Uh, and then in Seoul, I had the privilege of meeting a professor that taught at the university. And we sat and talked about the history of Korea, and that was very interesting. And I explored the buildings that were still up from when it was ruled, I guess by dynasties years ago, where I don't know what he would be titled, whoever ruled over Korea. It was a kingdom or what it was. I don't even know. I probably did once, but I don't recall. But I looked at all those old ancient buildings there with the lacquered roofs, and they were beautiful with the gargoyles. And I ran across, one day I was wandering around and I ran across an orphanage with just girls. And it was at St. Paul's Catholic Cathedral, which was in the middle of Seoul. And it was spared by the war. Seoul was, to digress a moment, Seoul was smothered with destruction after having changed hands. I believe it was 4 times. There really wasn't much left standing, and this church was spared because both the North Koreans and the United States, I believe, also used it as a headquarters because it was safe. There were some nuns living there, and they housed roughly 30 or 35 orphaned girls. And when I found it, it was really a nice experience. And one of the nuns befriended me. And when I went home, I wrote a letter. When I went back to the base, I wrote a letter home to one of my friend's mothers, who was a churchgoer and active in the church. And she was quite taken with something I said, I guess, about the orphanage. And she and women in the church made 30 or 35 big rag dolls, and together with clothing sent it to me. And I photographed it and sent it back to the church, and they posted it, which was a nice thing to do. And these little girls, they were just beautiful to watch with their dolls. Probably some of them never had a doll. It was a nice experience. And there was another orphanage that I used to go to called the Bupyeong Orphanage, and that was very well supported by the air base I was on. I think they helped with the construction of some of the buildings. And we brought them things as well. It was a good experience, rather enlightening.
Did the children, they must have recognized you, the girls, so did they call you anything when you came?
One of the girls in particular did. Yeah, they all do. After you go there a few times, they know you're going to go there, and they usually bring something.
Did they call you anything? Did they have a name for you?
I don't know. I don't.
Would just be happy and run over.
Yeah, they probably did, but I don't remember. I know the nun used to call the vehicle a jeepo.
A jeepo?
She'd say, "Did you come in a jeepo?" And I'd say, "No."
Tell me about your houseboy.
My what?
You had the picture of the houseboy that took
Oh,
you.
yeah, we had a houseboy. He was, I don't remember now how old he was. He was probably 10 or 12. Very handsome young boy, and he'd come in the morning and sweep out our tent. If you can imagine sweeping out the tent, it was a train wreck. And he would tidy things up as best he might. And I guess if he wanted, he'd polish your boots and give him some money. And we bought him a Reader's Digest in Korean. And he used to curse in Korean. When we made him mad, we used to laugh. Anyway, we all put in some money and bought him a bicycle. And God, he was in seventh heaven. For a 12-year-old boy in 1951 in Korea to own a bicycle was like giving him a car in this country. And he just was so taken with it. Well, when we gave it to him, we parked it outside the tent. It was in the winter. And we put it next to the barrel that contained the fuel oil that we heated our stoves with. And the stoves always managed to go out in the course of the night. And when he came in the morning, we'd tell him, "Go fix the stove, we're freezing in here." And he'd say something in Korean, and he'd run out and he'd stomp on the hose that fed the stoves. Well, this one morning we sent him out there so he'd find the bike, and he went out and he didn't come back for a long time. And one of the guys that was dressed went out and found him there crying over the bike. He was so taken with it. So, like I say, it was a nice thing. I have a picture of him with his bike.
So
Nice young man.
it seems like besides your assignment on the base, you also got to know the people, the culture.
Well, yes, I did that.
How they do it.
I wasn't the only one that did it, but I did it at every opportunity. I I even got I even went down there once and met someone who dealt in the black market. And it's like the stock market. He said to me, if you bring me cigarettes, I'll hold them until the price is up and sell them, and we'll split the profit. And if you could get him a bag of penicillin, whee! But the only problem was that if you did engage in that, which I never did, if you did engage in it, you got paid in Korean money. Now, what are you going to do with that? If you try to convert it at the post office on the base, they say, "Where'd you get this?" So I used to hear stories that people said they won it playing poker or whatever.
Yeah, the choices you make, right?
Yeah, but it was a war-torn country's interesting. I know that when you wanted to get a new pair of boots, you went to the supply sergeant. More often than not, you didn't have them. But if you went downtown Seoul, you could buy them all over the place. So somebody was dumping American boots in Seoul and picking up money for it, I'm sure. But it was the way it is. That's war.
That's how they existed. So
That's the way.
unfortunately.
Yeah, the wars are wars, and crazy. Yeah.
So after Korea, were you sent back to the States?
Yes, I was. I
You
was.
were and your service ended. Did your service end from there?
No, I came back to Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, Kansas, and lo and behold, I got orders to go to Lowry Air Force Base. But I turned it down because 2 years had gone by, or the best part of it, and I didn't care to re-enlist. And I could see what would happen. It wouldn't have been immediately go to Lowry. I would have probably gone there and taken the physicals and more tests. And if I passed everything and they accepted me as a cadet, I'd have to wait for a class to start. By the time all that took place, who knows, another year go by, and then I'd have to obviously re-enlist her. They wouldn't be interested in me, so I chose to bow out, which I did. I spent 2 years, give or take, at Forbes, and I was in the Strategical Air Command, very similar operation, but rather than tactical day-to-day, they did strategical work, mapping, I don't know where. I looked at the photographs, I had no idea where they were. But we mapped everything of importance to keep abreast of what was going on in the world in case of another conflict.
Throughout the world, there it wasn't.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they were. Mapping, like in World War II when we invaded in Normandy. I'm sure there were multiple photographs of that entire area, and they'd finally select what would be the best spot to embark on. And I'm sure that many of these photographs we took were taken all over the world. SAC always had an airplane in the air.
Do you remember the day that you were discharged?
You mean what I did?
Yeah, what happened that day when you were discharged? Do you remember the day?
Well, we had a hell of a party the night before. It's the wonder I could drive the next morning.
That's okay.
But yeah, I remember it was exciting. I went to the club and with a bunch of my friends, and we spent a wild evening. And I called my girlfriend in Torrington, and she said, "You're drunk," and I said, "I might be." And next morning, I got in my vehicle. I had bought a car when I was out there, and I drove home, and it was kind of sad. What was sadder, I didn't mention this. It might be worth saying. I think about it. When I left Korea, I remember I got on the back of a truck, and it was canvas covered, and the back was open so you could look out the back. And as we were driving off the base to the airport in Seoul to fly to Japan, I had mixed feelings. I felt you get attached to a place. You leave a lot of friends, and you feel guilty like Mr. Bonner, you feel guilty leaving your friends, and you also feel guilty not feeling happy that you're going home. And it's a crazy thing. But you get over it quick.
It's a big part of your life, though.
Yeah.
It's a big part of every veteran's life.
Well, you live very close.
Yes.
You live close to guys, and then it's over.
You make special friendships. Yeah, and it's so
You make very special friendships, you know. You really do. You know, you share things that you can't even talk about. And it's an experience. And I'm sure many people experience that, and even more so than what I did, because I wasn't in combat. My life I never felt was threatened. I'm sure it was, but it was not really. But I can't imagine the bonds that people who actually fight the war in combat situations encounter.
I'm sure they were like yours.
Yeah.
What was your homecoming like when you got back here?
When I got back to Torrington, when I got discharged from the service in total, I don't know. I drove home from, I got discharged in Kansas, and I drove home alone in a car I had recently acquired. And I did things that today you wouldn't dare do. I stopped in Pennsylvania, and I slept on a picnic table at a park. Imagine that, doing something stupid as that today. Anyway, I got home. I don't remember. It was a nice thing. There was no parties or whatever. I just got home and unpacked, and my sister looked at my tattletale gray underwear and laughed. I said, maybe you can bleach it. She said, it'll fall apart. But I hung up my uniform and just went back to civilian life, and I went to college.
You went to college?
Yeah.
Did you go on the GI Bill?
Yeah, I went to college on the GI Bill. Actually, when I was in Topeka, Kansas, the military had a bootstrap program where if you wanted to go to a local college, they would support it, and you paid a pittance, and they paid the rest. And I did that. I went to Washburn University in Topeka, and I really enjoyed it. And I took a math courses from a teacher whose name was Terry McAdam. We developed a tremendous friendship. He was a paraplegic, and he wrote a book called Very Much Alive, and I took photographs for him. And I had a copy which I gave to a local person here who became a paraplegic, and he still has it. But I acquired some credits, and when I got out and went to UConn, I used those credits, and they accepted them, and it helped me. I got a good part of one semester of credits. I went on the GI Bill together with the savings. The GI Bill, the Korean War GI Bill was not the best GI Bill. It was probably the worst of all the GI Bills. The World War II was better, and Vietnam was better. But it gave us $110 a month for 9 months. And I saved money in the Air Force. I did photography on the side in Kansas. I took pictures of horse shows and whatever, and earned money. Whatever I earned, I banked. So when I got out, I had a few bucks, and I worked. And I went to UConn, which was relatively cheap back then, for 2 years. And then I went to professional school for 4. I was lucky I got in after 2.5 years of college, because normally it's 4 years. But I was fortunate they accepted me.
How did you start the dentistry as opposed to?
How did I what?
How did you decide on dentist or eye doctor, optometry as opposed to photography?
Well, I was
photography was more of a hobby.
Well, yeah, it was a semi-serious hobby, but I always wanted to get into a profession. And when I got out, I went to UConn and I enrolled in Arts and Sciences, I guess. College of Arts and Sciences. And then I got my eyes examined in Willimantic, and I thought, gee, this looks like an interesting profession. I was considering dentistry. So I gravitated toward eye care, and I took my pre-med or pre-optometric, same thing, course at UConn. and I got accepted at Optometry College very early. I was very fortunate. I think that was due to the fact that in 1957, college enrollments were down as opposed to up. And I think because they were down, there were more seats available in these colleges. And I was fortunate because I was a little older and possibly because I was a veteran and I had decent grades.